shining countenance. Hello, everyone. I'd like to introduce George Castro. George Castro is an amazing fellow. He's been over at, he was one of the community folks, one of the four horsemen over at Ubuntu and Canonical, shepherding that whole project. He moved then over to Heptio, which then got acquired by VMware, and then he spiraled off into the cosmos, and he can tell you a little bit more about where he's gone. He's a force of nature, and I'd like to turn it over to George. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. I miss your soothing voice, and I miss everyone. How much time do I have?
You have all the time in the world.
Okay, all right.
Until we cut you off.
You all know how I get sometimes.
Exactly.
I start talking, and then it might be midnight or something like that. Cool. All right. I brought slides.
Try and share.
I told myself I'd be prepared. Does this work? All right. Sorry about that, everyone. All right. Before we start, I wanted to start with a factoid in case there's like nothing that you learn in this presentation and it has nothing to do with you. Maybe you might learn something totally different to tell a friend. So the name of this project is called Cloud Custodian, and that sucks to type all the time, right? So the numeronym is C7N. So when you see me refer to C7N, that's just Cloud Custodian, the word smushed together. Sort of like how people call Kubernetes K8S to kind of shrink a name. The term for that kind of word is called a numeronym, and I only recently discovered that and thought it was kind of cool. So I figured if you don't learn anything today, maybe you learn that thing. So hi, everyone. I normally do this presentation with Liz Acosta, one of my coworkers, but she's on West Coast time doing her thing. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate coming back here. I recently was reminiscing to a friend, and someone mentioned something about lugs, and someone else in the group was like, are lugs still a thing? Do people still have those? And actually, I might have been with Josh Burkus in this conversation, and I remember saying, yeah, I'm speaking at my mug here pretty soon. And it kind of dawned on me that some people, like the kind of classic lug era, the golden age, is like behind us and stuff. And now seeing everyone here has got me like really motivated. And now I feel really awful for not showing up to these meetings. So awesome. So next slide. So thanks, Mug, because this is where I got my start. And like, I know I might be a world famous community manager now, but a lot of people in this virtual room like kind of encourage me to like do presentations, try stuff until it breaks, things like that. And it's gotten me a lot of awesome places that I never thought I would be. I would thought I would have Michael Dell follow me on Twitter. So that was a cool thing when that happened. And I've been very fortunate to work with a lot of smart people and a lot of interesting technologies, and like a lot of good open source people. I always try to share as much information as I can about stuff. So I'm sitting here at after VMware. I kind of wanted to do something else. I miss doing startups. I dabbled in a VC company for a bit. That wasn't for me, so that didn't last too long. And then I found a friend of mine was doing a startup around cloud compliance, and it was some ex-Canonical people, and I'd known him for a while, and I kind of wanted to get the band back together. There's some great people that I'd worked with at Canonical, and feel like in a lot of cases we kind of missed the success that a lot of other people were having. So the chance to do it again with a fresh startup or built around open source was a no-brainer for me. So I went to go work for them around this project called Cloud Custodian, which I had never heard about. And in fact, this entire field of software is kind of a new thing. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit because I will be going over some of the commands and all that kind of stuff, but I more want to share this kind of class of software or this area in operations, security. It kind of hits a lot of areas, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So Cloud Custodian actually started out inside Capital One, which was a bank that wanted to work on compliance software, and they decided to open source it and donate it to the CNCF a long time ago. Actually, Cloud Custodian is something like 6 years old, and it's been an open source project ever since, used by probably your financial institution and a lot of other very large organizations, usually around the if it's like a regulated industry, right? So like places like banks, anyone that's touching your money or healthcare records, things like that. So this like style of software is kind of it's stronghold, and it's kind of spreading out to the cloud and things like that. And I hope to make that obvious. And if I don't, then I failed at my job. So what even is compliance? So it's very interesting that the cloud really democratized computing, right? You can give anyone a credit card and they can have infrastructure up and running in minutes, right? And during the heady days when cloud first started, we all read the stories about how you worked at a stodgy company and you would request a server and it would take 6 months. So instead you convince your boss to, give you some access to a credit card. And that's where shadow IT came from. And then there's messes everywhere. And then some people started to leverage the cloud, right? And then there's hybrid people and all this kind of stuff. So we had the cloud kind of made it really, really easy for anybody to get computing resources. And I think we all know that by now. Hopefully by now, some of you have been working with it, and it's numerous complexities and intricacies. So the idea that people could have infrastructure and it wasn't like in a tightly regulated, there's the server room where like George in a uniform there guarding access and things like that. Now everything's just on clouds everywhere, and what's gonna what could possibly happen? And probably as many of you is aware, it can be very complicated for organizations to do cloud, which is why it's so common, unfortunately, to see things like, hey, there was an entire data breach, or hey, sorry, 5 million email addresses and your social security numbers were sitting in an open S3 bucket somewhere, and have a nice day. And then we see that all the time, right? So this kind of software is kind of designed to solve that problem, right? Which is, we all love that developers can be very productive. They can fire any infrastructure that they want. They can do a bunch of stuff. But at the same time, there's risks of having stuff on the public internet, right? So how do you do the balance? You want your developers to be able to move fast and do stuff, but you don't want to add a bunch of artificial processes that make them have to like slow down, and do not self-service, right? Self-service is one of my favorite parts of cloud that I think a lot of people forget about, right? They talk about elasticity and, all this kind of, you pay only for what you use and all those benefits of cloud. But the self-service aspect, I think, is something that we all forget, right? It's like, normally, unless I'm doing something weird, nothing can really slow me down other than myself. And that's where I like to be, right? The minute I have to like wait for someone else to approve something, I slow down, and I hate that, right? And developers hate that and they get all grumpy. So this class of software is designed to ensure that you can deploy infrastructure onto the clouds, but also be able to apply policies to them, depending on what your business needs are. So these policies can be anything from, hey, make sure George doesn't deploy open S3 buckets. Hey, make sure Jim doesn't, open the load balancer up to internet traffic. Those kind of things that you immediately think about. But think about regulated industries that have sets of processes that they have to follow, right? Everything on GovCloud and all of the policy. A lot of the large users of Cloud Custodians, they'll deploy thousands of policies, right, to adhere to maybe a piece of legislation or some kind of policies that they have at work, and apply that to their infrastructure. So finding that balance is hard, and that's what next slide. And that's what Cloud Custodian was kind of meant to solve, right? If you're a bank, you want to ensure that your stuff, is all secure and everything's running the way it's supposed to be. And because you're a bank, you have a high risk if that's not happening, right? So, I wasn't in the room when Capital One decided to open source this thing, but I suspect that they sat there and said, you know what? This is kind of stuff that everyone needs. And when you have infrastructure stuff that everyone needs, the open source model really works great for that, right? So what exactly is Cloud Custodian? It's basically a rules engine that takes policies that I mentioned that you write in YAML, and then applies that to your infrastructure. So it's a command line tool written in Python. You can install it from pip, actually. So pip install C7n. Yeah, that's it. Is the package name, and that will pull that in if you want to follow along. And then there's extra modules for other clouds and stuff. But we'll get to that. It's an open source project. It leverages everything from Python to a lot of Lambda functions on AWS. So it was kind of born from a cloud native model. So it doesn't really like run like you wouldn't run this like on your server or something at home. This would be something that talks directly to your cloud provider and helps you manage that infrastructure at that level. So it's very much that's where that plays, not so much on your like laptop. However, when you're authoring policies and testing out stuff, that's where you do the little pip install on your laptop. And it's part of the CNCF ecosystem. We're currently a sandbox project. CNCF is the organization under the Linux Foundation where you'll find things like Prometheus, Kubernetes, and literally just about every other open source project out there. So we kind of follow the same policies that those projects follow there. Next slide. All right, let me follow along here. All right, so Custodian is all about policies. There's a Unix tool that will run and will make what you say true. So the kind of primary primitive I want you to think about is a policy. Like, what do I want to manage on this cloud? And the way we do that is, next slide, is I'm going to go over through a policy here. It's a YAML file. I think everything is YAML these days. It feels like, but I don't know. I got over it, and I kind of write everything in YAML now. So policies start off with this. I'm going to give you an example here, and then I'm going to hope that by the end we kind of figure out what this policy does, because the idea is for you to be able to look at these policies and kind of understand what they do and how they apply to your organization. So all policies have a name. So this policy is going to have my first policy, pull stop tagged EC2, and then it'll become more obvious why I named it that at the next slide, as we get through the policy. Oh, did you move on? Sorry, I'm trying to match my slide moving here. Okay, the next part is an important thing that we call the resource. Resource is a thing on a cloud. So this is either a cloud resource or a service that the policy will be applied to. In this case, we are going to look for EC2 instances on AWS. So if you can imagine, every single service on Amazon, Google, or Azure, they all have a name, right? So this could be aws.ec2.s3. So I want you to kind of, in your brain, while I'm going through this example, think of an Amazon service that you might be very familiar with, and then think about a thing that you would want to apply for that, and that might help you do a better mind mapping. But for this example, I think a lot of people hopefully understand EC2. That's a compute node. So that's what the example we are going to apply a policy to an EC2 instance. And okay, there we go. This is a filter. So this is, we are going to figure out what criteria we are going to match to. So filters refer to the attributes of a resource that you want to match on, right? The result of filters is an output of resources that will meet this criteria. So you'll say, find this, and it will return everything that matches that. This output of resources is what will be performed on when we get to our next step. And the filters also generate a report, which we'll cover shortly after this. Filters are optional, but the first two things, the name and the resource, are required. Next slide. All right. So the next thing is actions. So this is where the real power of Custodian comes in. Is you can filter looking for anything on a resource, and whatever that returns, you can then do stuff to. So in this case, we are going to do a stop action on a tag, and the tag is going to be C7101 with the value of it worked. So in this case, what we're going to do is we are going to search for tags that are, say, my first policy pull on them, We're going to stop those instances, and then we're going to apply a new tag to that says it worked. All right. Have I totally lost anybody so far? Okay. So let me give you a more real world example of something that you could do here. AWS S3 bucket. If it's open to the internet and it's not tagged with this specific thing, close it automatically. So the idea behind this kind of software is to basically you're writing regular expressions on the stuff that's running in your infrastructure, and then you can do stuff to it. It turns out that in a lot of these cases, tagging is very important and the ability to kill instances. So imagine doing a search on open S3 buckets, and then you find 200 more than you're supposed to have that are open on the internet, right? Wouldn't it be nice to just be able to get that list so you can find out what's there and then be able to close those immediately? And this is the real power of software like Cloud Custodian. Be able to find anything that's actually in your infrastructure and then be able to action on it. So everyone with me so far? Hopefully everyone's nodding. Everyone feeling good? All right. So moving on to this next one, I'm just going to give you, I like to learn by example, right? So usually I go to the examples part of the man page like first, and then I go read what it's supposed to do, which is probably a bad idea. But I'm just going to go a few over the commands. So let's assume that we just wrote that little policy in our text editor. We like these policies to live in Git, usually where your other infrastructure lies. So wherever your Terraform is, that style of stuff, whatever provisions your infrastructure, it can kind of, it's kind of meant to live there. A lot of Cloud Custodian kind of follows that Git ops mentality, which is your infrastructure as code. And as you're doing your operations in Git or whatever, stuff happens in the infrastructure. So you can run the custodian validate and then that file name or whatever, and that will make sure that it's an actual valid policy. Next. Custodian run and then that file, which dash output dir will take a bunch of stuff and splat it onto disk. Important things like logs, output, stuff like that. And that could be very useful for you can actually find out what's going on. It'll do a little report for you, which I should have an example of. So you can just generate a report on that output that you just output. Next. This is the important one, custodian schema. So when I said resources, it said aws.ec2. There's hundreds between all the clouds. There's like thousands of services out there. So this is like a useful command that basically outputs everything if you're looking for stuff in AWS or you want to grep through that or whatever. So that's the command for that. And then giving it an actual resource. So if we do custodian schema aws.ec2, it will return all the stuff under EC2 that you can poke at. So that will that just kind of gives you a little example of how you would execute this policy. So next slide, let's put it all together. All right, so we have my first policy. We're looking at EC2 instances in this region. We are looking at a tag called C7N-101, and we're looking for ones that say my first policy pull. And for all of those instances that you return, I want to stop them and tag them with a new tag to say that it worked. Now at this point, I would do a little demo, but I'm going to skip that right now because the demo gods have not been kind to me on US East 1 today. So you'll have to believe me that works. So let's talk a little bit about why you would do something like this, because I think the example is my first policy pull or things like that. So it's common for organizations to tag their infrastructure in clouds. So, that might be like production, dev, testing, and that's organizational specific, right? Which means that custodian doesn't really come with a set of like defaults or anything like that. A lot of that stuff is business logic, and custodian's kind of designed to be a knife and not try to outsmart you. So we don't try to do any smart tagging business. You just tell us what tags you have, and what you want to change them to, and then like the rest is your business. So one of the more common operations for Custodian to do is to be able to help people automate their tags. So if you're looking for a certain thing and you want to be able to tag those instances, or maybe you're looking for certain attributes between certain services, you can certainly do that. One of the most important things that Custodian does is actually be able to remediate or kill instances or resources on the spot if you tell it to. This can have drastic consequences. Due to the nature of the software, it kind of runs with elevated permissions, and it has access to like your accounts and things like that, like as you're setting it up. So if you do a match and you say, hey, if it's an AWS EC2 instance that looks this certain way, and if it does, I want you to destroy it, it will absolutely do that. Especially, so if you typo that thing, there goes your infrastructure, which has happened to people sometimes. Which is why it has a robust dry run feature, which you should definitely use every day. And generally speaking, what most people recommend doing here is, instead of outright destroying things, you can give it a tag to say, hey, I suspect that these buckets are open. We should probably go through these, or whatever tag you want to call it. Or you can tie in a mailer component that will send an email to someone that says, George, you have an open bucket under your account in this region. Please take actions to secure it down according to these policies, blah, 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 blah. Or it will automatically be deleted in 3 days. As an example, allows organizations to keep cleaning stuff up, but not just hit enter and half your infrastructure goes away, or whatever crazy stuff you got going on. So does that make sense for everybody? Okay, so moving on to the next slide. Should be so by default, I've shown you what we call pull mode, which is you have a command on a jump host or your laptop. You write your policies of what the stuff that you want to lock down in the cloud. And then when you hit enter, it goes and it does stuff right to the cloud. So we call that pull mode, kind of traditional Linux CLI mode, where you have stuff and then you write it. So that's pretty interesting. However, sometimes you're going to need something a little bit more powerful, a little bit more dynamic, right? So we have, if you click on the next slide, you have different modes that you can actually run Custodian in, right? Because let's say you're looking for open S3 buckets. You don't want to write a for loop that's doing that all the time. So instead, Custodian just does that for you. It has a mode here that you see there in red that we've added: type, periodic, schedule, every 2 minutes. We defined a role there, and then it does stuff, right? So what this does is it provisions a Lambda that then sits in the cloud in AWS itself, and then it would run this policy every 2 minutes. So this is kind of cron mode, I guess, of Cloud Custodian. And what this would do is, if we're filtering on, retagging things or deleting people's buckets, you'd know that, within 2 minutes or whatever, that would be remediated. However, that's still a little racy. So let's move on. And we will get to it here. All right. So here's another example of an over-provisioned IAM role. So we showed you a very simple introductory policy. Let's get into more real-world examples here. So which mode will this policy be written in? It does not appear to have a mode. So what we're going to do here is we're going to name this IAM role over-provisioned. We're going to prevent you from accidentally making too many IAM roles. So we're looking at the resource, which is another required one. This one happens AWS.IAM role. We're going to filter out IAM roles that are not named IAM provisioner and that have permission to create IAM users. We're basically making sure we're filtering out like the system names. And then we're going to send an email to security and cloud teams at CloudNice, which is our made-up company here for this example. So the actions here, I think, are pretty cool. So type notify. You can send an email. You can send someone a Slack message, things like that. So as policies are being run on your infrastructure, you can kind of have that cool notification of what's happening. Especially nice when you have like a remediation that happens. A remediation is when something is corrected, or like something is killed or tagged or whatever. It's been remediated to like follow the policy that it's supposed to. So here's a more illustrative example on the left, on the right. We're going to filter on roles that are not named IAM provisioner and have the permissions to create users. So we're going to do that. And then I'm going to skip to the end of this one because that one's kind of a straightforward. And if you don't know IAM, you're like, I have no idea what he's talking about. So let's move on to slide 20. So let's do another IAM example. So here's just another one that tags things. So we have the name, and we're going to target IAM roles again. And here's a new mode called type CloudTrail. So this is another really powerful feature that I think kind of separates Cloud Custodian. So far, we've been doing filters and then asking the infrastructure to return us results, right? And then if like that's not fast enough, we can basically stick it in the equivalent of a cron job. CloudTrail mode is very interesting because it just talks to the cloud directly, and CloudTrail is kind of the thing that spews out every action that's happening in your cloud account at that time, right? So what this allows us to do is we're just basically following the log of your cloud and then being able to remediate on that in real time, which is really handy for certain situations. So in my example, right, if you're doing a pull policy and it says, George has open S3 buckets to the internet, we don't want that. Right? You can send the email, you can do the whole delay thing or whatever. Or with the CloudTrail mode, the kind of real-time mode, right? George, I go to create a bucket, and then I go through all the steps. I can't believe people still do this. It's like kind of hard to make an open S3 bucket, but it keeps happening all the time. So I go through all the pain and I make an open S3 bucket, and then I put all of your credit card information in there, and it's now on the internet, right? As soon as I've asked the cloud to provision it, Custodian's Lambda is already shut it down. So as you can see, that's kind of a very powerful feature that is why we kind of call it guardrails for developers. I am never put in a situation as George to put my company at risk by making an open S3 bucket, because there's a policy in place that makes sure that I cannot make an open S3 bucket. So in the first examples, we're kind of looking for what you have. And in this example, which is where mature organizations want to get to, is having that real-time compliance to ensure that like George can never accidentally put your business in a weird situation. For large organizations, cloud misconfigurations can easily cost them millions of dollars, right? You have the wrong thing open or something like that. It could cost money. It could cost, you can get in trouble if you're a regulated industry, right? And you're supposed to be able to manage this kind of data. So that's where that kind of real-time compliance is really handy, right? To make sure that no one in this region can ever open a S3 bucket or have an open load balancer or any of the bad things. So when you think about what organizations need to do to keep their infrastructure tightened up, being able to apply these policies on each one of those AWS resources and via groups and in the ways that they kind of expect when they're doing normal infrastructure stuff is the advantage of a tool like Cloud Custodian. And in this case, it's just automatically going to tag anything with an IAM role. So this is a common use case where organizations don't like to have instances that are not tagged, because then they don't fall in the right place. Like, they just want to have everything nice. Everyone wants their stuff nice and organized. So that, you could just automatically always apply tags to things like as they're created, and that can really help you out. Next slide. And then that's just another visualization of what that is. Let's actually skip down to 24. Would you, Craig? Custodian is multi-cloud. So I've been giving you AWS examples, but GCP is supported. And I just wanted to show you what a Azure resource looks like. Surprise, Azure dot and then the name of the thing. Right. One thing I do want to point out is if you look like under events, and when you look at AWS and Azure policies and Google policies, they all look different because they kind of use the more native terminology of things that are specific to that cloud. So if you're looking for one general policy that will apply to multiple clouds, that's not really a custodian's kind of wheelhouse. We like to dock directly to what the native thing the cloud supports. So they could share a lot of things like, the policies, but for each cloud, they do have to be different. And those of us who have tried to make a general configuration language that covers all of computing, but a bunch of different vendors and things, you probably know that that's an impossible task. So when you're writing AWS policies, you're going to use AWS language and so on. And that's how this policy worked out. So in review, if you hit 26, it's basically a rules engine. It's in Python. You can install it. You can start writing policies. So people are going to ask, hey, where do I go and get pull? And I have like a ton of policies that are like managed by the community. And then I'll be able to take the money saving ones and then apply that to my work stuff. Part of the reason Custodian is purposely kind of the way it is many of policies and things like that people are expecting are very, very business specific. If I were to give you here's George's top 10 policies for saving, for saving money on AWS or whatever, there's a good chance none of that is going to apply to you. So along with compliance, the money saving thing is actually a really important aspect. So filtering out for instances that you haven't touched in X amount of time, or you'd be surprised. I hear constantly because we have public meetings and people show up and they're like, hey, we didn't know we were running entire swaths of infrastructure that we weren't aware of until we actually went looking for it. Because in a lot of cases, organizations, depending on how they pay for their bill, like that could have been, that credit card could have belonged to a person that doesn't work there anymore, and things like that. And you'd be surprised, and even how much a lot of the more sophisticated organizations just continue to fail at just being human at the things that we always are not good at compared to computers, right? So it's just very nice to have tools like this to ensure that, what you're using, what you think you're using, and what you're actually paying for, those three numbers should be really close. And a lot of times they're not. And that's really crazy to me. So this tool is kind of designed to do that. And countless stories of organizations that, we added a policy for our DevRel group to turn off their demo instances, after 24 hours after their presentation is done. And then they come back with like, my God, you've cut our bill 57% or something crazy like that. So you'd be surprised how lazy we become just leaving infrastructure running and things like that. So I know a lot of this is domain specific. That's why I was kind of powering through the policies there, because I didn't want to get hung up on the, if you're not familiar with AWS, I more wanted to talk about the concepts and why this software is a thing. So next slide, Craig. So really the way I like to talk about this is giving your developers guardrails. And a heavy Cloud Custodian user is HBO Max. So I've heard this story from them, and it's just like a great example of what they do. So they kind of consider the policies that they write for their developers to be guardrails, and they want them to go as fast as possible, but not get into trouble. So what they do is they actually track their metrics on their remediations and their policies and things like that, right? So let's say it's Monday, and then you have a new policy that you have to follow due to business reasons, or maybe someone passed a new law or something like that, and you go and you apply it, and then the next day you notice that that policy is being triggered by a very large percentage of your developers, right? Then it becomes, well, is the policy too aggressive? Could it be split up into other policies? And you'll find that organizations, instead of punishing developers for, when they accidentally misconfigure something, they take that data and they try to find ways to shrink that number of remediations down, because a remediation is kind of when, you've hit the guardrail, but you're still on the track. You know what I mean? You haven't gotten off the rail. So by taking that data of how much, things are being remediated, or, what things you should be remediating, which is or not, and all the aspects and all the complexity of a cloud, sophisticated organizations are figuring out how to take that data, and lead them to having better crafted policies, so that the developers could keep going a little faster. I think in the past, you've heard me talk about speed before when it comes to like development. Every second, with a lot of developers, every seconds that you can shave off in their efficiency for large organization pays off. It's like a big, just years and years of engineering time over time, right? So like, for a lot of these organizations, that kind of hyper optimization around that developer experience to get their infrastructure up, right, without having to mess around and, slowing them down unnecessarily, or even worse, like removing a thing, that was being used because you didn't know, things like that. So that's where that real power comes from. And last slide, please. So thank you. The everything I've talked about today is 100% open source. It's cloudcustodian.io. I work for Stacklet, which is the lead contributor to it. And then we sell a bunch of enterprise stuff that adds single panes of glass, or like a single glass of pain, however you want to call it, that gives you all those fancy metrics and slides and stuff and makes your boss happy that you're using open source. We're on GitHub /Cloud Custodian, and we're on Gitter, which is also a Matrix. So see Craig, I'm using that stuff. And we have a mailing list as well. And we have live webinars that we do every month if you're interested in this kind of stuff. And those are free. And you can go to our YouTube channel, and we usually record a bunch of stuff where people way smarter than me go over these policies and really get into the nitty gritty technical details for that. Now I've been talking for way too long. But it feels, was that a half hour? How long was that, Craig? Did you have?
That was about a half hour, actually.
All right. Yeah. All right. Cool. I don't want to go too long. Any questions, comments, or whatever? I probably should have paused and asked for questions in the middle. But,
well, that's all right. Gib asked a question about can it be used on premises for your own like it sounds like something. Gib, can you elaborate on that, please?
Sure. So I have a little lab in at work, and basically we have auditors, and they like doing things, and that takes work and effort. So I'm thinking maybe this is a tool I could experiment with. So I'm just wondering if this is something. I have a bunch of computers. I throw Kubernetes on them or something, and can I use it to, basically put my guardrails in place on my little internal lab there?
Yeah. So we are working on Kubernetes support. I was hoping it'd be done by KubeCon next week, but that is not happening. But it's pretty close. But yeah, you'll be able to see where it says AWS dot or whatever. That would just be a Kubernetes resource. So, yep, absolutely. As far as raw bare metal or like VMware and stuff, not really. There's an OpenStack provider, which is being used by, I think it's a Chinese telecom. I can't remember. Azure, GCP, AWS, Kubernetes upcoming, and then OpenStack are the things we support now.
Okay, great. So the things that can monitor and notify on, would that include like password usage, passwords that are too simple or that have not changed in a while, something like that for security stuff?
No, I think you would use this more for stuff closer to the resource itself versus the data that's going through the system. Does that make sense? Like this would be used to detect whether that connection is secure or not, which it probably is by default anyway, and not the actual usual content of the data. Like, like we don't go inside your databases. We don't do any of that kind of stuff. We're kind of talking to the raw cloud resource itself.
Infrastructure.
Yeah, the infrastructure parts and not the data parts. Although I'm pretty sure there's probably a few places where those where you might be able to do stuff like that, but I don't think passwords is one of them.
Well, how about like configurations of, you're talking about the file system. You have a file that's open for reading publicly. How about things like a port that's opened or not configured properly, or a VLAN that's
Yeah.
not set
Yeah,
up
so
properly?
things like ports, if the cloud can report what it is, so yes, you can absolutely use it to remediate like ports and things like that. Let me see if I can find a list of resources here. Ports. Keep asking questions while I search.
Well, I could ask more.
Yeah, keep going.
So things like configuration of two-factor authentication, certificates, things that I guess become complicated, right? So you're trying to find out, is there a way to say my certificates are old, or
Yes.
okay,
Yep.
all right. So
I'm going to give you an example right here. Actually, I just happened to be on this page. Can we see the chat here? So if you scroll to the bottom, it shows you an example policy where you're looking for expired certificates. Although that was the first one that came up. I could probably get you a different one.
yeah, okay, great. That looks good.
Yeah. A lot of this, if you check out this next URL, this is the equivalent of running the custodian schema command. It shows you all of the resources that are available to you. This is just for AWS. So if you scroll down, actually go to the root, Craig. Just go to /resources. Up one more. Yeah, there you go. Scroll down. So these are the resources that AWS has. So if you look at, if you can grep for it and the cloud can give you a result, then you can definitely action on it. That's why it's hard for me to answer yes or no, because I have to know that resource in the cloud specifically off the top of my head. But here's what an IAM certificate one would look like if as an example. I paste. There we go. Hopefully that'll give you the example that you're looking for there. Any other questions? See, Jim, I told you it was boring. All it does is search for stuff in clouds and kill stuff. It just so happens that's really important.
No, this is great stuff.
Yeah. So this is, I think it's interesting because I just saw literally a story the other day on the news on how there's a guy who just goes around on Amazon, finds open databases, and then mails the people that own them, pay me or whatever, and bad things will happen. And I read about this kind of stuff like all the time, and things like that are 5 lines in custodian policy to make sure that you don't have buckets open, or
Sure.
at least find what's open, and being able to generate reports. Because one of the reasons I think the software, some of you might be asking, well, my cloud has a thing that does cost optimization, or it does policy, things like that. And while cloud providers will always provide this kind of functionality, no one will care about your Amazon bill more than you will as an organization, right? So having an open source project that can really dig deep into this kind of stuff and give people that insight that they can use anywhere, and is everyone's kind of sharing the cost of maintaining that software, is like a powerful tool to augment. In a lot of cases, there's other software out there that only does cost optimization, for example. Like you can combo it with this, right, to kind of get exactly what you need. It's been my understanding from talking to large organizations is they use those built-in cloud tools, but no one is going to care about bill reduction more than your own organization. So having a tool like this is important to them to be able to do that kind of stuff.
Well, do you see organizations like coming up with policies and standardizing on them? I could see, for example, some auditors saying, okay, have you got this policy running? Are you configured this way? For example, you have someone who is verifying that default user IDs and passwords have been changed from, the vendor defaults. That policy could be enforceable across the whole, wide cloud environment. So do you see people doing that type of thing?
Yeah, in fact, there are policy packs. Let me see if I can get you a list of some of them, because this is some of the stuff we sell here. 1 second. That kind of give you that like compliance, like this, CIS foundations for AWS, which is like a set of policies that you have, right? You can grab that entire policy and apply it to your organization to do exactly those sorts of things.
Okay, great. I love it.
I'm trying to find a list of our policy packs, because I used to be able to rattle them off, and there's a lot of acronyms here.
Do you have stuff like HIPAA and whatnot as well?
Yeah, that's the list I'm trying to find.
Okay, exactly.
Yeah. I don't think there's a HIPAA compliance pack that covers everything, but there's definitely
well, like you said, it's guardrails. It's basically getting so that and you mentioned too, the developer that leaves something on overnight or something like that shouldn't be left on overnight.
Yeah,
types of things. Let me check this out.
Let me see. Hold on. There's like a whole FinOps blog that I help write. It kind of measures all this kind of stuff. I don't want to guess, because these things are like usually like big and expensive and stuff.
Right.
Keep asking questions while I Google in the background. Are you liking that go? I'm almost switched over. I'm close, man.
I'm there, but there have been a couple times that I have sinned.
So George, when you say you can install it, well, you can download it. It's open source. Where is it actually running? You download it to your desktop and point it at your AWS stuff?
Yeah. So like you opt to it and you give it the permissions, but what happens is the actual execution of the stuff is created as Lambdas in the cloud itself. So
those are running in the cloud. And then is there triggers and stuff set up? So like you said, you create a new resource and it automatically applies the policies?
If you set it up to do that. Yeah.
Okay.
Like if you say, so if it's real time, it will go whenever the thing fires off.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
If it's periodic, it will go at whatever interval you said. And if it's just a normal pull Unix mode, it will just execute it as soon as you hit enter. But hopefully you've done a dry run ahead of time.
So then are people creating these YAML files and then storing them in Git, or is there a database of them? Or
Yep.
what do you do?
So I'm actually going to give you a bunch of examples, which in hindsight, I should have just pointed you so you can go through here. There you go. You'll find the examples that I went through here in there. And we're actually in the process of kind of expanding these policies. it just becomes really difficult because a lot of organizations can't share their policies because it has their organizational data in it. You know, like they don't want to share that kind of stuff. So we do try to keep a set of example policies and things like message templates for the email that you send people when they get remediated, that kind of thing. But this is something that we've just started to do recently, as far as shareable. When I first started, I was kind of like, should these be like chef recipes or puppet things or whatever, where you can like apply, you can give people like, here's some best practice, unfortunately, a lot of it is just so tied to the business logic that's kind of, I don't want to say a fool's errand, but not the focus of the tool, I guess.
Okay. But it's a command line utility. You've got a bunch of YAML files.
Mm-hmm.
Do you put those on your desktop and work from there, or do you create a VM in the cloud and put them there? Or
so what I usually do is I do a git clone.
Okay.
And
you do a git clone, but where are you? You're sitting at your desktop, or are you
I do
SSH'd into a server somewhere?
So usually, like on my laptop, I go to the squiggly source, which is like where I always put like my source files. And then I git clone my stuff, right? A common pattern is for usually the policies can live close to your like your Terraform recipes that actually fire up the infrastructure, so that when you're setting up stuff, it's also applying policies at the same step. Okay. I actually should have mentioned this because this is like a trend that is important. What we do not do yet, but want to do, is this thing called shift left, which is where policy and things are moving closer to the origin of the software, similar how like QA and CI/CD do that stuff. So the way it works now is you can say, hey, it's time for me to set up a new production thing in US East 2, right? And you go and you do your Terraform stuff, and then it comes up, and then you say, okay, time to apply my policies for this kind of thing. Then you do Cloud Custodian, and it does a thing, right? What we want to be able to do is be able to integrate Custodian directly with Terraform. So when it stands up, it just stands it up already compliant, and there's nothing for other than enforcement after you touch it. Ideally it comes up compliant every time. But we're not there yet. Typically, people just have it live in Git wherever their infrastructure is provisioned. Sorry, I had a total fart there. Now, we don't really tell people how to use it, so you could do it on your laptop if you want, and you'll be able to like access your infrastructure, or a jump host, right, where people just SSH to it, and then that's or the VM or container or whatever thing you have that says, okay, this is the thing where all the policies are going to live, and then maybe you're Git pushing locally or something there.
In a large organization, you're doing this on your laptop. Are you the only one that can touch it? Because it's on your laptop.
Yeah. So what we do at work is like I have it on my laptop and you could do stuff. But when you're making changes to policy, you're pushing that to the work repo where everybody's stuff is. And then
anybody could check it out, and anybody could clone that repo and
right. And then George wants to change policy A and line 6. And it goes through review just like normal code does for developers. It says, nope, that's not going to work. So that's kind of the GitOps workflow, I guess. That's kind of an overloaded term, right? Because like I have to use Git for everything anyway. So like, but the idea of like keeping the policies in there and making all that change and having that change log be in Git alongside the stuff that provisions the infrastructure can be valuable to certain organizations. So like,
that's what I think I would want.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's the only way to do it in my opinion. Everything is always revisioned, centralized, and then you could do fancy webhooky things right? Like every time I
Right.
make a change to a policy, run a dry run over here on dev,
Sure.
and
Sure.
tell me what the output is, and if it's all red, then we know George messed something up. Where's your test, Castro? Right?
Right.
Same stuff developers have
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah.
Except for ops, right? Like it's kind of nice
Yeah.
to have that
Yeah. Okay. Good.
thing there.
Is
Any other questions?
Is the only remediation notification, or and I know I'm asking for trouble for this. Does it,
Yeah.
could you just set something up so it says, okay, instead of just notifying people, just shut this thing down?
Yeah. So you could just say, so the actions you can do is notify, tag, and kill, stop. Right. We try to tell people, and general best practice is tag first, notify, and then give them a window. But in certain cases, live policies will just, kill something or not allow you to create it in the first place, because in certain cases, an organization's like, we don't care. There should never be an open bucket. I don't care what the, what you're trying to fat finger, in the AWS console, trying to figure it out. So yeah. Obviously we found that just silently remediating without telling the user what happened, probably not a good idea. But yeah. In one of the examples, you can obviously do all three of those things at the same time.
Right. Okay. No, I know sometimes, you don't necessarily trust your code to do the right thing. It's like, oh, this condition occurred, and then suddenly, your whole business is down.
Yeah. Yeah. And that has happened. So,
yeah.
A lot of these automation tools, you gotta leverage that dry run functionality. And Custodian won't even execute if you mess up the YAML or whatever, and it's tabbed
Right.
wrong or whatever thing. So
if it doesn't pass linting, then it doesn't.
Yeah. So you at least get that going. I know this because I'm typo city all the time. So
well, and formatting YAML is an exercise in and of itself.
Yeah, a lot of validate command, and --dry--run is the thing, and I think a lot of tools have that these days. Which is good.
I know Ansible does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions out there? You're all quiet. You had a few extra slides. You want me to show those as well?
I don't know. What are on them?
Let me show you what's on them, and you can tell me if you want to share them or not. So there's this one. There's an example for other cloud providers. So it looks like Google Cloud Provider.
Oh, dude. Hey, Gibbs. This actually exactly answers your question just on GCP.
Cool.
Notify the ops team if your certificates are expiring within the next 60 days.
There you go.
There it is.
So one thing I like about these policies, I know people like to rag on YAML, is like, I'm a YAML engineer now. I hate that, right? But I like that you can kind of figure out what's going on, right? There's a value, expiration less than 60, notify, and there's an email address, and it goes out via PubSub. Cool. That gives me way more information than I thought I needed. So yeah.
Well, so I'm curious, your assessment on the difficulty. I mean, all things have some type of learning curve. And, like you're saying, this looks pretty straightforward. I just wondered, does it really get more complicated as you work with it? Or is this, something that can be picked up fairly easily? What level of experience do you need to have? Are developers going to be using this? Is this going to be widespread and easy to use?
Yeah. So if you're a developer, I think it's very easy to use, right? If you know how you use your cloud, you know what I'm saying? Like I use my AWS stuff for demos, right? So it's relatively easy for me to have a rule that says if an instance is up for over 3 days, kill it, because, I'm more price sensitive. If you work in an organization that has compliance needs, it's as complicated as those compliance needs are, right? So if you're a bank, it's going to be hundreds or thousands of these versus, a medium to small size business, or even a more unregulated business. And then the cost ones could go as kind of as deep as you want to go, however you want to slice and dice. It's kind of asking, like, how complicated could a regular expression possibly get, and And then it's like, well, I don't know. It depends what you're filtering for.
Yeah.
And we all know how that goes. So
what could possibly go wrong?
yeah, that was probably the worst possible example I could have used.
That's a great example.
Yeah. Everyone's like, never mind, I'm good. I'll pay extra.
Yeah.
I'll pay someone to validate my email. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. We actually have a customer that is a gaming company, and they want to enforce people not working on the weekends. So they actually have policies to ensure
Really?
that, if they fire up a instance and they want to work on the weekend, it shuts it down for them. You know, and then they're like, "Wow, we also saved a ton of money." I was like, "Really? You think so?"
That's awesome.
So I mean, it's kind of hard. Sometimes it's kind of hard to say examples unless you have real ones, because it's kind of like when you learn a computer language. Well, what's this good for? It's like, well, I don't know. What problem are you trying to solve? You know what I mean?
Sure.
We kind of give you the resources, and we give you like 4 things you can do and be able to filter on any one of them. And then, have a good time. Sometimes it's difficult to say that. And as you might imagine, in compliance in some of these industries, a lot of this stuff is very proprietary inside information because they are related a lot to the business. So
Sure.
in a lot of cases, our examples are kind of the way they are. But the core itself and things like that are open source, and we have a nice, healthy contributions from everyone from Amazon themselves. Microsofters have helped out. Just almost every financial institution I can name off the top of my head is either consuming or is dipped into Cloud Custodian a little bit. So I'm like really proud. I'm very surprised at the amount of adoption that it has. It's just invisible because like you never really heard of it compared to like famous stuff,
Sure.
Yeah.
Well,
People still think I do Kubernetes. I'm like, dude, I haven't done that in like 2 years. I'm doing invisible stuff now.
Well, I think it's one of those things too, where you could spend, a weekend playing with it, and then all of a sudden the light bulb clicks on. It's like, oh, this is what this could do, and then suddenly you're spending, months creating all these various rules in that for your organization, so that everything is, as tidy as possibly can be. It's like, it's like cleaning up after yourself, honestly.
Yeah. And a lot of it you don't know until you start using it, or I didn't know I needed a custodian policy for this until something bad happened.
Well, usually
So,
you hope you can get in front of that before, something bad happens.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, sometimes it's easy to get cynical because you read on the news and it was like, wow, another open S3 bucket. That's wow, but it still happens way too much.
Mhm.
We actually have in our examples used to be the S3 bucket. And at work, I'd be like, do we want to do that? That's kind of hello world. Like, is that still a thing? But all the time, the next time you're reading up on, you see something, bad happen to a large organization and they leak data or something. Almost always there's an open S3 bucket in that story somewhere, right? It might not be, the data might not have been in there, but a thing that had the credentials that, had the thing that went into that thing eventually was in an open S3 bucket, and someone followed that all the way through, and that's how they got the data. Like, it's just very interesting to me that like these kind of things keep happening. So it's exciting to actually have software that can like help, kind of do that kind of stuff. So
that's the last slide, I guess.
that is with a little heart love.
Let me ask
So
you more a detailed kind of, drag you into my life kind of question, right?
oh god,
So-
please don't be too technical.
All right. So
Sorry.
at a fairly high level, right? So
Yeah.
I got an environment and I'm subleasing. I've got tenants.
Mhm.
And so now we've got to enforce stuff with the tenants. See, do
Mhm.
this, do that type of thing. And this looks like a real good tool for doing that. If I
Yeah.
package up, an environment says, okay, when you unpackage your setup, these are the things that we're going to enforce, and we have the rules all set up, and we could just monitor the enforcement type of stuff.
Yeah.
Like say a real good monitoring tool. I mean, even auditors should be all over the place on this, right?
Right. Yeah. So that multi-account mode in the documentation we call Cloud Custodian, and then there's another variant of it called Cloud Custodian org, which will do that execution that we talk about, like when you hit enter, except you can do that over accounts. And that's kind of how organizations use Custodian, because they have thousands and thousands and thousands of accounts usually, across multiple clouds. So like when they execute, they want to be able to execute those things in parallel and not, all right, I finished with, Aaron. Next, Abel is that. If you had to like go through in order, that would suck, right? So C7N org kind of does everything parallel over multiple accounts. And yeah, that's the exact use case it's designed for. Gib, you got it right on the nose. So I guess I did my job explaining.
I've got a question for you, George.
Sure.
You said early on that you configure the YAML file and Cloud Custodian will make that true. I think you used words something like that, right? We'll make your cloud conform to what that YAML file says. So
yes.
with the let's say I want to open up SSH access port 22 on one of my servers up in the cloud. Would the way to do it be to go into the YAML file and say on this particular server that matches this pattern, we want to open port 22.
Hold on.
And then you apply that YAML?
Yeah, you would run it again. Whatever action you want to do, you would just run it again.
I wouldn't go up to AWS in the policies there and fiddle with my opening in port 22 with my firewall or whatever. I would actually do it in Cloud Custodian and then push it.
I think you'd probably use something else for that rather than Cloud Custodian.
Yeah, I think, hold on, I'm looking at a policy right now.
I think you'd use Cloud Custodian to say, hey, is port 22 open? And if not, then notify someone rather than have it actually do the opening of the port.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's my understanding.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm looking at it one right now where you could just give it the value of the port or whatever. However,
I think of it as more as like a tattletale thing.
Yeah.
It's like he's got port 22 open.
That is a great one.
All right.
Yeah, actually, here we go. Dennis did a blog.
But
post.
I should first tell Cloud Custodian that it's okay for port 22 to be open on that host.
It looks like this blog post is going exactly through that with pictures of him actually going into the AWS interface and opening a port. Hold on, let me see here. Scroll down to the policy. There's a zoom on that. Oh, there we go.
So here's opening up a bucket or creating a bucket or.
One second. I haven't read this in a long time. Yeah, this one more looks like a remediation. But I don't think you would purposely remediate yourself as part of like an idea to open port 22. You know what I mean?
Okay. So this is saying it's okay for port 22 to be open.
Well, this is kind of a different example, but it's close-ish.
I think in this particular example, it says action remove permissions.
Yeah.
So I think it's going through and closing it rather than opening it.
Right. So I think the more use case is Jim, you would try to open port 22, right? And then custodian would mail me and you, let's say I'm your boss or whatever, and says, Jim's trying to create a port on 22. This is not allowed, blah, 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 blah. Right.
Okay.
And then the discussion would be, does this class of does the thing that's you're being filtered at, should Jim have access to create open port 22 on those? And then I would adjust a policy and then just apply it,
Okay.
So let's say you are supposed, I was like, oh yeah, of course we want Jim access to that or whatever. I would go apply the policy right? And then reapply it or whatever. And then you would just try to SSH again or open the port again, because that's what we're checking, right?
Yeah. Okay.
And then, because now you got to think, well, do I want to look for, is everybody listening it, or is it when I'm trying to create it, right? Now you've actually, that's two different things.
Right.
See, that's why I'm going crazy. This is client stuff is because you can very easily sit there and go, oh, okay, I am looking for this. But then it's like, no, I'm not. I'm looking for every time I've written rules where it's like, but it should be returning those things. I'm looking for them. Right. And then you're like, oh no, I'm actually looking when you create them, not what actually is sitting there already. Right.
Okay.
And that's when it's like, oh, okay, maybe I want to do pull mode stuff first before trying to, I try to outsmart myself sometimes, right? Where it's like, well, why wouldn't you just start out with CloudTrail ones is a thing that has entered my brain, right? Because of course I want the real-time thing. That's way too cool. But then people say,
my experience with cloud stuff is limited because I'm in healthcare and we've always had data centers of our own. And now I've got a customer who's got some stuff in Azure. And so I'm learning about that, and I can see how this could be used. It's a very small setup, but I could still see how we could inject this into it.
Yeah, and even if it's just basic stuff, like what mistakes do you you just talk to people. What annoys you about work? They're like, oh, we're always accidentally creating this kind of thing or whatever.
Yeah.
Someone's always forgetting to tag instances or
sure,
do these things that they're supposed to do. So you can use tags creatively to like kind of create little hit lists for yourself where it's like, these are the things that I think are happening and things that are actually happening. Do they match? Is there anything I could do there for that one? So yeah, Craig, calling it a tattletale, that's a very good thing.
What it sounds like it does. It's like you basically say, okay, you look for this particular thing, and if you see it, then let people know what's going on. And if you have the authority to do so, shut it down.
Yeah. I mean, given the tattletale kill.
Yeah.
Interesting. I don't think that's in the kid's story, but
you never know.
Yeah.
Well, very cool. Thank you. I posted the link to the comment card several times over. So if you would please take a moment and fill that out. I have
another question, if I can.
You may.
So can this connect to APIs? Can I call some service and ask a question and get a response back and then act on that response?
No, the resource support has to be like in core Cloud Custodian. You can't arbitrarily choose a resource. Like we have to add support to those resources for each cloud each time, because certain resources only support certain things. So we have to do that. It doesn't just like automatically, you can't point it to an API endpoint and figure out what it is and then do that without writing a provider for it.
I think the question is more, could you query an API and then have it do something as a response to that? Is that what you're asking, Gib?
Yeah. So for example, can I query my user database and find out if the user ID is still valid?
Oh, you mean like be able to talk to like the user database in the cloud, like the IAM stuff and things like that? Like
let's say you have a corporate database, like an LDAP database or something like that, and then somebody leaves the company and they have AWS credentials or something like that. Could you then go through and say, okay, such and such left the company, now strip all of these credentials?
Yeah, so those kind of policies are common. I don't know about connecting to an external LDAP thing, though.
Okay,
because usually you're making those actions on the Amazon account things themselves, but I would be very surprised if that's not already a solved problem, right? Because
people come and go all the time. Yeah.
Well, no, because the Amazon stuff and the LDAP stuff should already be synced, right? That's an interesting question, though. I'll look that up. I guess if you're using the hosted Amazon LDAP server, I think you'd be able to query that. I do know that the mailer will talk to your LDAP to figure out how to mail people. But I'm not sure about using an external database to.
Well, that's cool. So you can give it read access to your LDAP, and then it knows about your organization and stuff too, right?
Yeah, as far as sending notifications and stuff, yeah. Let me see here.
Just a quick reminder for folks, by the way, if you're filling out the comment card and you leave your email address out of there, I will skip over you for the prize. So please put your email address in there if you are willing and are able to do so.
Let's see, monitoring. That's a great question, Gabe. I owe you an answer on that one, because I would assume that is. Like, I know people are remediating accounts and all that stuff all the time. I just don't know exactly how. I've only been doing this a year.
Well,
So-
wouldn't that be more organizational specific as well? Like certain policies and such?
Yeah, but I should be able to have a general answer for that, I would think. All right, Gabe, I'll have an answer for you the next time we hang out. I'm gonna ask my my engineer tomorrow. Because I know big use cases like the IAM management and things like that of accounts, and it's like one of the primary use cases for it.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Okay. So I only have 2 people that have put in their email address for the comment cards.
So that was a new rule. We didn't know. I thought
He already did.
we only put our email addresses in if it's changed, right?
Well, go ahead and if you want, I think you can go back to the comment card and edit it. If you can't, well, I'm sorry. Although for some of you, you know what? For some of you, I know what your email address is anyway. But go ahead and fill that out. We'll give you a few seconds. Jim McQuillan, would you tell us about the upcoming events once again? Just so people remember.
It hasn't changed since the first time I said it, but for those who weren't here, June 14th, we have Josh Burkus coming to talk about Kubernetes. He's the community manager for Kubernetes at Red Hat. Formerly, he was the community manager for Postgres, for the Postgres team. And he's done other things and stuff. Anyway, should be a great conversation with him. July 12th is Sean Powers. He's going to be talking about SSH tunnels. Sean is an editor at Linux Journal, although I think Linux Journal might be gone now.
It's still a website.
Is it still a website? Okay.
It's still a website.
He's been around for a long
but
time.
he's been there a while when it was a paper one. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's given talks for us in the past, and he's always interesting.
He did that one about the SSH tunneling at PenguinCon.
Okay, good. Well, he's gonna grace us with his presence on July 12th. And then August 9th, Wolf will be talking about Jupyter Notebooks, which is this online way of running Python and many other languages in a presentation kind of thing. It's pretty neat. And I don't know that much about it, but Wolf knows a lot about it. So he will be talking August 9th about that.
What's really cool about Jupyter Notebooks is it allows you to share the entirety of whatever it is that you were doing. And there, so you have basically a Python REPL. So you can run different bits of Python code and then import things. You can do graphing in there. So there's matplotlib support and a whole bunch of other things. So yeah, it's great for making, in early days, when they had Smalltalk and the Xerox Park and all that other stuff, they had this idea of being able to change your code and be able to see the results in real time. And this is bringing that dream to the browser, about 30 odd years later after it was introduced. But
and I believe it's more than just Python now.
It's more than Python. I think
30
you can
different
do
languages in it.
I think you can do R with it at the very least.
You JavaScript in Node.
Nobody does JavaScript. Forget JavaScript. No.
I do a lot of JavaScript.
I miss you, Craig.
I miss you too. I'm cranky. I'm cranking.
Craig, I
the
saw you
JavaScript.
using a Trello board. I was like, wow, that's not a terminal. I was expecting like a shared Emacs.
oh,
instance
come
or
on.
something.
Command
Yeah.
line Trello, yeah.
Just haven't figured it out. That's why. Anyway,